Hello, this is Catherine from Accelerated Reader, reading books for you. Today, I will be reading Chapter 24 from Two Worlds, a novel of friends and foes from strange places, by Laura T. Lee. Before I begin reading, I would like to give a big thanks to the author for sending me this book to read on my channel. In the description below, I've included links where you may find and purchase this book. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Chapter 24. Halfway to the Elfin City, Tara and Jake started whispering to each other. Lily could only catch a few words like war and freaking dwarves. Then she heard Jake mutter, "I really do think that we shouldn't have dragged Lily into this war. We did only take her from Earth for a simple reason." Lily looked up. "What are you talking about?" You probably might not remember this, but there was this night where you were looking out of a window a few years back," Tara said. Of course, Lily had looked out of a window a gazillion times by now. However, when she searched her memory, something popped into her head. One wintry night, when she was about 12, two people had climbed out of a hole in the sidewalk outside and were looking around. One, a woman, had seen her peeking out and said something to the other person. He glanced at Lily, and they both jumped back into the hole and disappeared. Lily snapped out of her flashback. "Those people on the sidewalk that other night. That was you." Jake and Tara both nodded. "So you took me from Earth because I saw an elf?" More nods. Lily frowned, trying to process this new information. However, as soon as they stepped over what was left of the northern tower wall, an alarm sounded from nowhere. 10 armed dwarves ran forward and handcuffed Tara and Jake. "Off to the dungeons," one dwarf said cheerfully. "We never built a dungeon," Jake complained. No one noticed that Lily and Stacy had disappeared. "Let's go," Lily hissed. She and Stacy sprinted to the hole where the eastern tower door once was and clambered through. Stacy scowled when she saw all the rubble. "Stupid dwarves," she muttered. As they ran through a hallway, voices sounded right in front of them. Stacy pulled Lily behind a door as the dwarves let Tara and Jake down the hallway. They were both tied up, but Jake had somehow managed to grab his sword. As they walked, he accidentally tripped and dropped his sword. The blade clanged on the floor. A dwarf smirked. When their backs were turned, Lily did a very daring thing. She rolled out of the doorway and snatched up the sword. When she had scrambled back to safety, she angled the sword so it reflected the hallway light, shining on Jake's face. He blinked and glanced ever so slightly to his right. When he saw Stacy waving and Lily holding his sword, he made a face and mouth, "Help us get out of here now," before turning back to the dwarves. Suddenly, Lily realized that they would have to free Jake and Tara before they reached the dungeons, wherever that was. "We need to make a distraction," she whispered to Stacy. "I have to get to the control center," Stacy hissed back. Lily took one last look at the dwarves and followed Stacy down the hallway. Luckily, the control center was empty for the moment, but Lily knew it wouldn't be long until a dwarf came through the doorway. They went over to the room where they had made the skin rash grenades. Stacy crossed over to a table where a bunch of metal scraps and wire lay. She gathered up an armful of the stuff and carried them over to another table in the corner. She turned to Lily. "If this works right, you won't get electrocuted?" Stacy began to work. attaching wires and using a solder gun to meld pieces of metal. 10 minutes later, she held up a metal rod. Lily could see that there were no wires sticking out. Am I supposed to whack dwarves with this? She asked. Stacy gave her the elfin stink eye and returned to her work. She grabbed a thin tube filled with clear liquid and inserted it into one end of the metal stick. Opening a compartment on the bottom, she pulled out 2 tiny metal tabs. Stacy colored one tab red and the other yellow with some markers. Then she frowned. I'm sorry, Lily, but it will take too long to explain how to use this device. You can have this. Stacy handed Lily a loudspeaker. Lily stared at the device. That's it? Yes, Stacy replied. But be careful. That loudspeaker is very loud. It's in the name. After some protests from Lily, they finally ran out of the door and back to where the dwarfs were. 2 minutes later, Lily spotted Tara's boot heel disappearing behind a doorway. She peered around the corner. The dwarf stood in a gray cell with dust and no windows. One dwarf held a key, and Lily was pretty sure it wasn't for Jake and Tara's handcuffs. Here goes, she thought. She stepped back and yelled, "Yo!" into the loudspeaker. The sound that came out was enough to make Stacy clap her hands over her ears and for Jake to fall over on his face. Tara also fell over. The dwarf screamed and danced around in the cell, their hands over their ears. Lily screamed into the loudspeaker, "Surrender! There is no escape from my awesomeness. Drop your weapons and give me all your money." The words worked like magic. The dwarves had no money, but they dropped their weapons. The key to the cell was buried under a pile of dust, the gray fuzzy kind in an old basement, not dirt. The terrified dwarves backed against the wall. Lily used her sword, Jake's sword, to cut through Jake and Tara's handcuffs. Jake, dazed from shock, mumbled something like, "I have no money," as Tara helped him to his feet. Stacy grinned, and Lily tried her best not to crack up. About 5 seconds later, her shoe unearthed the cell key. After they all had gone out through the door, Lily smiled at the dwarves. "Enjoy prison," she said, then locked the cell door. Stacy melted the lock with a blast of fire from her stick before sending a massive electric charge into the room. Stay tuned for Chapter 25. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. In the description below, I've included links where you may find and purchase this book.